Okay, so I just finished like 100%ed Bug Fables. Took 50 hours. The entire playthrough is up on the YouTube channel. If you check the playlists, the first two are the videos that we recorded, and then just PS4 share capture of the entire 50-hour playthrough after that without like commentary or anything like that. It's just pure gameplay. Um, Finished the whole game, 100%ed it, got all the achieves, got all the chivos. Um, I'm gonna have to. This might be premature because it's currently June, but Bug Fable's probably my game of the year for 2020. Can't really think of anything that's come out so far that I liked more than it, and can't imagine there's anything that's going to be coming out in the rest of the year that, like, in terms of sheer, like, personal enjoyment, I can't think of anything else that might be coming out unless something like really surprises me that I'm gonna be like, oh yeah, no, that supplants it. For me, get Bug Fables is probably game of the year 2020. We'll see what happens, but like I really liked it. Like from beginning to end, this game was so good. Like I struggle to think of anything about it that I didn't like. I struggle to think of anything about it that was like bad. I guess like I can't, okay, like the PS4 version is not a good version of this game right now. That's one criticism I can say is don't get the PS4 version because it's not a very good port. I don't really I couldn't imagine like what the reason for that is, but there's a lot of like input delay and like input lag that's like really jarring. Almost every time you press a button or have to press a button, it feels like there was just this delay in the input getting read. There's like stuttering and hitching all the time. Every time, like, it feels like the game is like running like the flag, like, okay, now the enemy will do this attack and that's going to start this animation, and the game like it's it probably comes across in the footage in on the share footage that I put up, but it's hard to tell without like a visual or like a kinetic reference of the controller in your hand, and you're and it's like you're pressing a button and the game is just not reading the input. And there were a lot of times where like I'm holding a button down, like whenever Leaf's doing his like ice shield thing, I'm holding the button down and like he's doing the shield, and then suddenly he'll just stop doing the shield because the game stopped reading, like the game like fucked up reading the input of the button being held down, and so the shield gets turned off even though I was still holding down the button. So PS4 version, not a good version of the game. If you're gonna get this game, which you absolutely should, get the Switch version if you have one, which statistically you do, or the version on Steam. I assume is fine. It's been out on Steam for like a couple months, so I assume that version works good too. Um, like aside from that, like the only thing I would say is like they don't use as many buttons as they probably should have. The triangle button is essentially unused throughout the game. They don't there's almost, I can't think of any inputs that require the use of the triggers. So there were a lot of weird awkward times where like you're trying to like use the horn attack, like Kabu's horn, to like knock blocks away, but you press it like the button twice by accident or something like that, and he like does the dash move and breaks the ice block, and that's really annoying. I feel like they could have used their button economy a little bit better in terms of like the puzzle, the overworld puzzle solving viability. Just having every single like traversal or puzzle solving ability being mapped to one button was not, it could have been better in that terms. I think maybe just like because the game was developed for PC first and foremost, maybe maybe they were thinking about it more in terms of keyboard controls. But I don't know. I mean, it's Paper Mario, so like it's like so obviously just a paper. It's the Paper Mario game. So like if you're gonna maybe that's the reason they were thinking in terms of Paper Mario. There's the A button and the B button, and then just like the yellow arrow buttons just did like situational shit or like menu stuff. And oh, there's no like I think they said that they're gonna do an update that adds this, but after a while, your walking speed is really way too slow. You like it really could have stood to have like a run button or like a spin dash like Paper Mario had that lets you traverse the map a lot faster. But aside from those like little things where it's like these are things that could have been improved, but they're not necessarily bad things. Like, you could have used more buttons. You could have had a run button. I think they said they're going to add a run button, so maybe even that complaint will be outdated pretty soon. And aside from that, like, I can't think of anything in this game that I didn't like. Or even anything that I was, like, ambivalent towards. Almost every single thing about this game I really loved. Like right from the get-go, like it's just so like you can watch the video of like the first impressions, like that video, like Foxy Squirrely Plays Bug Fables. That's first impression going in almost totally blind. The only thing I looked at is like screenshots on the store page when I bought it. And it's going in there not knowing anything about the history or the development of the game or anything about the developers or anything like that. You go into it and it's just so in your face Paper Mario in the best possible way. And then you look up interviews from the developers and they're like, yeah, we just really wanted a new Paper Mario game, so we made one. And it's like, good, you did the thing. You just did the thing. That's the best way to do things. Like any other, like I'm trying to think of like other games that like do Paper Mario's gameplay, that Paper Mario-esque turn-based style, and it's too afraid. That's the like feeling that I was trying to explain during that video, where it's just like there are so many indie games that are like, let's make a game inspired by this old game we love, but then they're like afraid, and they're or just something about like they just don't commit to it. You need to commit to it if you're gonna make a game that's just old school Castlevania or just old school Mega Man. Or like here's my like I really love playing Final Fantasy as a kid. Here's my game, I really liked Final Fantasy. If you're gonna make a game like that, you need to go one of two ways. You either need to go the Toby Fox way of like you're wearing your influence on your sleeve, but you're clearly some kind of like creative psychopath, eccentric genius that's just so like next level with your creative output that like you take those influences and you really just throw them into a blender and create something wholly original, or you do what Bug Fables did and you just commit to it. You're like, we're making a motherfucking Paper Mario game. That's what you want. That's what I want. That's what everyone should want. Just make it. If you're sitting there going like, oh man, I really love Paper Mario. I want a new Paper Mario game. Just make fucking Paper Mario, and that's what they did, and I love it. It's hard for me to like off the top of my head to think of like examples of like things that didn't do the correct way. I always like go back to Bloodstained, where it's just like, here's all like Symphony of the Night style Castlevania. It's like, yeah, but you forgot the part that made Symphony of the Night style Castlevania good, though, because you're too busy trying not to get sued. I don't care if you get sued. Just make the game. Make the game that you're trying to make. Don't be a coward. But like even then, even with like how blatantly like in its aesthetic, in its gameplay mechanics, uh, in the user interface, just like it bleeds Paper Mario from every orifice, it still manages to like not rest on its laurels. It doesn't just coast on being Paper Mario. Like the this is just motherfucking Paper Mario really fades and really wears off after the first couple of hours because they really pick up the slack in terms of the charm and the world building and the characterization and the chemistry, and you can really see like, oh, like they had a story to tell. This is something that could have been told with any. I think that's the secret. Is you could have told this story with these characters in any other kind of setup in mechanically in terms of gameplay, genre, or implementation. Like this could have been a Final Fantasy style JRPG or Dragon Quest style or any. It didn't have to be Paper Mario to tell the story that they ended up telling. And I think that's the best fusion. That's the best combination is you take a story that's like this is good all by itself. It I think that is another part of the trap that happens when like modern indie games try and like make here's my game that's inspired by games I played as a kid that I really liked. Is you're just going like I'm gonna make a game based on the game I liked as a kid. Oh shit, I have to like make a story, or maybe you don't even make a story at all, like the one step from Eden approach of there's just literally no story. It is literally just the barest aesthetics, decently good aesthetics, like inspired artistic direction, but there's literally nothing. It's literally just like we remade like our twist on Mega Man Battle Network style gameplay, painted it and just put it out there. Like there's nothing holding it together. There's nothing really like keeping you coming back to it. That's the thing. Is you need something that keeps you coming back. You know, it's like there's this video Digibro did that's really old and before he went crazy about like how to tell if an anime is going to be good or bad based on its first episode, and he goes into this diatribe about like the premise is the least indicative part about something's quality. Like you look at something like Attack on Titan or Death Note or something like that, and that has a really striking premise. The premise of, oh, here's a notebook, and if you write someone's name in it, they die. Or the premise of it's a post-apocalypse where humanity is, like, beset upon by this, like, monstrous horde of giants. And you're like, that's really interesting. And then you watch it, and you're like, oh, they didn't have a story, though. This isn't good, actually. Like, the Death Note manga is really good. I don't like the Death Note anime, and it's like episode 5 of Attack on Titan that I'm like, I'm starting to check out because they're trying to have like a plot, and and you realize like this isn't a good plot. This does not sustain itself beyond the premise. You had a really strong premise. This is always like, I've talked about this before. I want more stories that are just stay in Act 1. They're just like slice of life, but in a weird setting, right? Like, the instant in Attack on Titan when Eren like turns into a Titan and the plot starts happening, I'm just like, I'm checking out. You're getting away from what made this an interesting premise. I wanted to stay there. And I'm starting to realize now as I'm explaining it, like, that's not, like, it's not that I want to stay in Act 1 and like, have, like, a slice of life, although that is what I want. It's that like don't just like start with like, oh, here's a cool idea. Like you need to have an actual story. And that's what Bug Fables does. Getting back to my fucking point. What's the premise of Bug Fables? Uh, a bunch of bugs are hunting for magical artifacts to find the thing at the to find the magical thing. And like the bad guy get wants to get them too, and they're like, "Oh no, we can't let him get it." The premise is nothing special. What makes the game special is the world building and the characters. And you can really tell that like this was an idea they had, and they're like, okay, now we can put it in this game. So like they had the story and they had the idea and they had the aesthetic, and they, well, like not so much the aesthetic, but because like the aesthetic of the game is very much inspired by Paper Mario, but like they had all of that ready, and they're like, okay, we're gonna make a game inspired by Paper Mario, and they put their chocolate with their peanut butter. Whereas a lot of games of this type just have the peanut butter of here's the gameplay mechanics of a game we really liked, and they're either gonna not have any kind of excuse whatsoever, or they're gonna have like they're gonna be like, here's the premise. Okay, but what's the story though? Hey, do you like Castlevania? You like Mega Man Battle Network? Okay, what's the story? Oh, the story is the gameplay of Mega Man Battle Network's really good. It's like, good for you. I'm picking on One Step from Eden a lot because I need to finish recording Mega Man videos again. Point is, this is like now my go-to example of like Bloodstain's kind of my example of like a game that's we're gonna make this style of game that we loved as a kid, or like Bloodstain's an interesting one because it's actually made by the guy who made those games, but like we're making this style of game again, but like Bloodstain's an example of them not really succeeding, and then this is an example of like this is how you nail it. This is like a text. This is the exemplified version of this is how you do it. You start from the position of I want to make a game that's like classic old school Paper Mario. Okay, so you make Paper Mario. What's the game about? Well, it's about these three bug party members who have unique gameplay. Like there's like so much I want to get into that I have to like try and structure it instead of just keep getting off on fucking tangents about anime. Like, okay, well, what's it about? It's about like these bugs living in what's basically a post-apocalypse world, and they're trying to find like the 4 to 7 magical items, and here's an ant kingdom and a bee kingdom and a termite kingdom and a wasp kingdom and a desert that's a sandbox. It's I don't even know where to start because it's all so great. I do think that like they took kind of like classic Paper Mario as like a foundation and then did try to improve upon it. Because there's this really great interview where they talk about like where they say like I just want to play Paper Mario, so I made Paper Mario. Where they talk about like Paper Mario games weren't fucking perfect. You got it. Like there's things about it that were like this is not great. So when you're making your own version, you also want to try and improve on those flaws. So they do things with like the parties, the party that you get. And it's one of my favorite things about this game is you have the 3 party members and they're all active in battle at the same time. So instead of Paper Mario where it's like you have all these followers who like if they're lucky have like one chapter that's like about them, and then they're never real like Vivian is probably the only party member I can think of in a Paper Mario game who is both useful in terms of her gameplay and has actual story relevance. Almost every other party member in like Paper Mario game, it's like, yeah, I sure did use Bombette to blow open this puzzle in the environment and then never really use her again. Well, like, you use her in terms of gameplay because her gameplay's busted as fuck, but you get what I mean, where it's like, there's this other video I was watching where it's like, compare the party members in Super Mario RPG, where everyone remembers Malo and Geno and the other party members, which are Bowser and Peach and Toadstool, so like they're pre-existing. But instead of having this like, here's a bunch of characters, none of which really matter, you have these three core party members. And instead of it being like Mario and his party member, it's all three of them in battle at the same time. And that does create a lot more depth to the gameplay. Instead of it being like in Paper Mario, where it's like, okay, which party member am I going to pull out to use their like, I have to waste a turn, not waste a turn, depending on which game it is, swapping out a party member so that I can use their one ability to exploit this one weakness or set up this like broken speedrunning strategy and then swap them out and then use this item, blah blah blah. Instead, you have like the three party members, and you can arrange which one is standing like in front and which one's standing in back, and you can get all these different strategies set up based on like what badges or medals you have equipped to buff certain party members or give them different abilities. And like you can have, they really went crazy on like the amount of badges in the game that let you just completely create your own build. It's really cool. Like, there are a lot of reviews or like impressions I've seen that are like, it's not like, I think a lot of people are missing just how much player expression there is in the medals in this game and the party orientation that you can come up with. Because and just even in terms of like the kind of party you want to make, there's a bunch of different ways to just break the game too. And I feel like those are on purpose, like, because there's so many medals that are like synergized with each other that are like, if you're poisoned, you get like 5 extra attack points, and this medal makes you so that you never cure from poison, and this medal makes it so that if you eat any kind of food, you become poisoned. And you can make an entire build around getting one party member poisoned, and then just like throw 500 buffs on that party member so that they'll do like 50 points of damage a turn. And it's like, oh my gosh. And it has to be on purpose, because there are so many medals in the game that are like, okay, and like that feel like so intentional. Like, it can't be an accident that these builds exist that allow you to just completely demolish the balance of the game. And that's something that Paper Mario just didn't have, because it really, like, you can, there were badges and medals that you can like exploit, but the three like party members, and with how many medals there are in the game, and they all have distinct abilities and interactions, and you can really like, you can have a good build that has V at the front of the party, or you can have a really good build that depends on V being in the back of the party, and have Kabu in the or Leaf in the front of the party, and it really just depends on what you're doing. So you really can have like variation in the medal layout, or the medal like arsenal loadout. The medal loadout and party configuration of any given player is going to be different, and I think that's like there's more depth to this game than you might be expecting, especially if you play it like generic. Because like when I did my playthrough, I was kind of like, I didn't really take advantage of that, because I was really kind of generic. I was like, level up, health, magic points, badge points, health, magic points, badge points, health, magic points, badge points. And it's really like if you want to just dump all, like it's just like Paper Mario, dump all of your level ups into badge points, and you can just blow the game wide open. But if you're playing it casually, I can see how you can walk away from it with the impression that it was kind of like there's no like scale, there's no like sense of progression to it almost. I don't know. Like I've seen like criticisms in that department, but I'm like, yeah, but that's your fault for not exploring the depth that because there's so much depth and complexity and customizability to the mechanics of the gameplay of the battle system in a way that like the original Paper Mario and even a lot of other RPGs just don't have. That I feel like you're really missing something if you're not popping the hood and seeing like what kind of crazy bullshit can I do by like having Leaf empower Cabu and then having Cabu like charge max and then have V like have some kind of crazy status that she starts the battle with and then like relay her turn back to Cabu and then have him do some kind of like special move that has extra attack and just like demolish an entire boss fight in one move or something like that. You're really missing out if you're not trying to break the game. If you're not trying to see how you can break the game, you're not playing. You're missing so much of the game, of the core, like of the gameplay. But anyway, like there's so many things that I want to talk about that I really just like literally don't know where to start. Speaking of the fact that it's 3 party members, before I even start talking about like how great those characters are, I wanted to mention that like especially because I don't know when I'll start uploading it, but I did do like a little playthrough of Final Fantasy VII, not the whole thing, but I don't know when I'm going to start uploading those. Where compare like I wanted to find an opportunity to talk about it, but I don't like in RPGs where you have like a bunch of characters to choose from. Like take Final Fantasy VII as an example, where like there's 9 party members. There's Cloud, Barrett, Tifa, Aerith, Red, Yuffie, Vincent, and Sid. Oh, and Kate Sith. Whatever. And it's like here's 9 party members that you can put in your party of 3. There's 3 party member slots. Pick 3 out of the 9. So like that's not even a huge example. You can take games like Suikoden, which just have an offensive number of party members, or Chrono Cross, which has like I think 100 party members or something like that. And it's like after a certain point, it's like this is literally quantity over quality. I've never liked that style. Because at the end of the day, some party members are going to get neglected. At the end of the day, you're just going to have your favorites. Like and that's one possible advantage to having a bunch of party members is, some people will like Red 13, some people will prefer Tifa, some people really like having Sid or Barrett. And you can be like, yeah, a bunch of different people have different favorites, and so but you're just going to play through the entire game with those 2 party members that you personally like over all the other ones, and then never touch anyone else. And so because you're using those party members, they're the ones getting all the experience points, and so all your other party members who are in reserve are falling behind in terms of levels. And so that even further disincentivizes you from using them in your party. And it just feels like a waste. Like, you can say, like, well, it's better to have more because now, like, anyone playing the game can find 1 or 2 party members that they personally like and get attached to. But instead of just having a bunch of options and it's like, find one of these 9 really shallow two-dimensional characters. Really only Cloud, who's the main character, and Tifa, really, and even not even then, not even really then, have like more personality to them. Red 13 has like his little event in Cosmo Canyon, and then that's kind of it. Barrett has like his backstory, but then nothing after that. Even that's kind of never really resolved. Yuffie just has nothing. Who gives a fucking shit about Yuffie? Like they all get like a side quest, but then that's it. Like they have no relevance to the story outside of their one specific side quest because the game is going like, well, you can have any of these characters in your party, and we have to design the cutscene to work with any possible party configuration you might have. So they're always going to end up being kind of generic and like mix and match. Like you can take one character out of a cutscene and put in another character, and it has to work just as well because the game can't predict which party members you're going to be using. So they all end up suffering and being kind of shallow and generic compared to just have three or four party members, and that's who you have throughout the entire game, and just have all of the writing focusing on building up those characters. That's always what I've preferred. Like, even take Final Fantasy 15. Final Fantasy 15 has a lot of problems. Final Fantasy 15 is not a game that I would say, you know, did it right, but I do love the fact that it's just your 4 boy band members the entire game. Because now the plot can really focus on building up this core cast, this core group, and explore like how they interact with each other and how they develop over the course of the game, and what's Gladio gonna do during this scene, because they know Gladio is going to be there because it's not like you have any other option but to have him in your party. And that's what Bug Fables does, and that's my preference. I'm really glad that instead of the Super Mario RPG or Paper Mario thing of here's a shitload of party members. Well, like Super Mario RPG didn't have a shitload, but like here's like you have a max of 3, and here's like Mario, Toadstool, Bowser, Geno, and Mallow. Mario's required. Fill up the other 2 slots with one of these 2 characters. Even that's still too much. If I only have 3 slots to have an active battle, I would just give me 3. Just give me 3 characters. I prefer the Final Fantasy V. I prefer the Final Fantasy 3. Well, not even 3, because like those characters don't have character. I prefer that style of just, here's your party members. That's the party you have throughout the entire game. And that's what Bug Fables does, and I really appreciate that. And all 3 party members fulfill like classical party roles. Like Kabu is the tank. He's the guy who he has all physical based moves. All of his moves are just like, I'm gonna hit him. I'ma hit him real hard. And he has a move that's taunt. His first move is like get the enemies to focus on him, and they will only target him and not target the other 2 characters. He's the tank of the party. And V is your ranger, your archer type character, your rogue type character, where she's got the beamerang and she's the only one who can hit like flying enemies. And she like a bunch of builds you can make with V focus on giving her the ability to cause status effects, where you can poison her needles to cause poison on the enemy, or to paralyze them, or to put them to sleep. And the majority of her moves have her hitting enemies more than once. So they're weak attacks, but they hit multiple times. And depending on the circumstance, even if it's a low damage, doing multiple strikes in a row can be advantageous. So she's that ranged, dynamic character who's like not the strongest, but she fills like that support role. Oh, and she also like has the healing, the ability to heal the party. She's the only character who can heal the party, but the way that it's framed is really funny because it's the secret stash. So because she's like kind of that rogue party character type, she has like, oh, these are my healing items that are not part of the party inventory that anyone can use. Those are healing items that she has been holding on to for herself, and you have to waste MP like magic points to have her use them. It's like, okay, I'll share my and no. Anyway, so like she's the only character who can like heal you without wasting an inventory item, but the way it's framed is really it plays into that role that she's meant to play. It doesn't make her the white mage. It makes her like the thief-esque type character who's like, this is my stash. I'll let you have it because I don't want you to die. I'll let you have some of my stash. And then Leaf, who's your mage, your DPS, but he also has all the buffs. So he is the character who like has magic, and he's sort of like a. I'm trying to think of like a party, like a classic. I guess like you can kind of compare him to a bard almost in D&D. Like he's a character who has access to abilities that can buff your his party members or debuff the enemy. He has moves that like buff your attack or defense or lower the enemy's attack or defense. But then he also has spells that are like ice-based moves, so you can freeze the enemy and cause them to lose turns because they're frozen. And when they're frozen, that also lowers their defense, so that it makes the next time they get hit, they take an extra point of damage. And he also, because of the way he casts the spell, he can hit enemies who are in the back row, compared to Kabu, who can only hit enemies in the front of the row. V can hit flying and enemies in the back row because of her beamerang. Leaf can not hit flying enemies, but he can hit enemies in the back row because he like throws the spell and it kind of like goes underground. So all of the party members like fulfill that classic archetype of tank, DPS, and like ranger, like fighter, thief, and magic user, right? That's your classic kind of like fantasy D&D archetype split. And there's also a little bit of like white mage in there with like V being able to heal or what's that synergist from Final Fantasy 13 where Leaf can like do buffs and debuffs, and like that's way better to me than like here's 9 party members, a dragoon, a ranger, a white mage, a black mage, a red mage, a blue mage, the thief, etc. Just have 3 party members and have them do all the shit that matters. Fuck it. and then like that's all that's gameplay, right? The gameplay of the game is really friggin' solid. But the other reason like the main party that you get is like done so well is also because the writing in this game is really fucking good. Like I mentioned, like the story of the game isn't like so important really. It's not so much an excuse plot, but it's really basic. It feels like, you know how like Paper Mario 1 had just your standard Bowser kidnaps the princess, get the 7 magic Dragon Balls to be able to beat Bowser, kind of like cliche, almost generic starter plot. And then Thousand Year Door did all the weird, crazy shit that was like super non-standard. The story of the game really feels like that, where it's very basic and establishing. You know, it feels like how Paper Mario 1 had to be just like, let's do, you know, the standard thing. in order to like get an establishing. It feels like people use what's it called, the Purge movies as an example of this, where the first movie had to be a generic slasher like movie in order to justify the idea of the setting. I've never like seen that argument in terms of that example, but that's what it feels like. It's like here's a really basic standard like traditional story through which we have the excuse to be able to explore these really interesting and well-written characters, or and explore this really well done like world building. The focus of the story is the characters and the world building for sure. Like the actual like plot of the game might be like, okay, let's go find the seven magic stars or the four whatevers, the four MacGuffins, in order to get the bigger MacGuffin to stop the bad guy from doing the bad thing. MacGuffin in the traditional sense of the Alfred Hitchcock quote of it's the thing that all the characters in the movie care about, are obsessing over, but the audience doesn't care. I don't care about the artifacts, and I don't necessarily care about the everlasting sapling either, because you know that like nothing's really gonna happen. You know that like whatever even the premise, the setup was, where it's like we got to get the magic sapling so that the queen can. What did she even want it for? What did the original queen want the magic sapling for? It seems like kind of like a nefarious object to want to like get your hands on. But even that does kind of get like a little twist at the end. But anyway, like really the game does have like a three-act structure to it, and the first act is almost entirely just establishing the setting. It's really like takes it easy and it's low key, where it's just like I mean like chapters like 1 through 4 are like act 1, and chapter 2 has like the entire thing is like you're at a festival and you're just like enjoying this festival. There's no real sense of urgency to it, which is a good thing. It's like it's that thing where it's like just have like the slice of life act 1, where the hometown never gets burned down, and everyone can just have these little adventures all the time. This is a very adventure friendly world, by the way, which is always great. And then like after like chapter 4, it starts like, oh, now there's a ticking clock. The bad guy has the thing, and he's gonna do the thing. So now we gotta go stop the bad guy and get the thing, stop him from getting the thing, so that he doesn't do the bad thing. And then Act 3 has like all the warriors, like the Rohan rides for Gondor thing, where it's like all these characters, this like army that you've built up throughout the game goes in charge and has the big sequence at the end where it's like, yeah. And it's that's not the part of the game where you're like, this is a really good story. The thing that matters is like figuring out what the fuck is going on with Leaf, or like or solving like Kabu's little personal like personal crisis with himself, or like V developing into not being quite so much of a greedy cunt. And that it does it a pretty good job of like, I think it kind of it absolutely knows that it's not the this is the problem that like the original Paper Mario had, where it's like, oh, you go to a place so that you can get the magic thing. The reason you're here, like the only chapter that really kind of manages to avoid that is the Lady Bow chapter, but aside from that, it's always just like, what's the driving force behind why you're in this area? To get the thing. what's the driving force of why you're going to the Golden Hills? Well, ultimately you want to get the thing, but but what's like keeping you invested is it's really interesting learning about like the religion of these bugs who worship a motherfucking Venus flytrap. And the way that played out was really like that like wasn't really what I expected either. But I still that's like such an interesting idea where like these bugs would worship a Venus flytrap. That ultimately doesn't end up like that ultimately like is implied to be a different kind of thing, but like you can go into this one house and like read this like priestess's diary about how she doesn't really know if she believes in Venus, but then she sees her and it's like, oh my god, it's real, and she becomes super devout. And you meet all these other characters that are like hanging out. You meet like the ladybug knight and his partner, and you learn about like there's this like dialogue that's dropped where it's like, oh, some shit went down with the ladybugs, and it's like, what the fuck happened with the ladybugs? And you meet Chubby, and she like becomes friends with V, and that starts her on her little character development. And you learn that like Kabu's got like a little bit of he believes in the religion of the Venus flytrap also. And then you go and meet Venus, and she starts dropping these plot seeds of like, oh, Kabu, you got some dark shit in your backstory. Oh, Leaf, you're super fucked up. Oh, V, you're a little bitch. And then you get to chapter 3, and like, what's the driving motivation of chapter 3? Oh, you want to get the thing. But what you actually give a shit about is going back to the beehive with V and her getting her little character development, because her whole thing is like, oh, I'm a bee. Everyone's a motherfucker. I'ma go do me. I'm a strong, independent bee. I don't need no paint. And then like she gets all this like character development, and you meet the queen of the bees, and that's really fucking cool, and all this stuff, and Leaf gets to go hard and be like, listen, motherfucker, you might think you're all that, but you ain't all that. Some shit's gonna go down and you're gonna feel bad about it, so you better get your act together. And she's like, oh fuck, you're super right, because I know what your tragic backstory is. And then like the antagonist attacks and like overthrows the thing and steals all this shit, and you're like, oh fuck, we gotta go stop him from doing that. Let's go through this area that Kabu went through during his backstory and learn about how he's fucked up and all his friends died, and like he's carrying all this like this angst, but he's like trying to be super positive and like trying to live up. So like the driving like investment is these characters and their story and learning more about the world that they live in and all these like world building details. This is like the world building in this game is so good that it's like, this is why I'm really fucking sick of the Dark Souls ripoff style of storytelling that's like plagued the game industry lately. And it's not fair, because it came out before this really started being an epidemic. But I'm gonna pick on Hollow Knight again as an example of like what I'm sick of when it comes to this style of storytelling, where, oh, we're gonna like write all these details about like the backstory and the world building, but like, oh, we're not gonna give all the answers. And it's like, what? Like where did all the moths go, and what's with these snail shamans, and what's going on in the abyss and all this shit. And it's like, why can't you just tell a story though, and like have it be an actual thing? Like, you're trying to like coast on this idea that Dark Souls presented, but you're not even doing it correctly, because the point of Dark Souls was not that it had like incomplete lore and you like had to like try and fill in the gaps. It's this problem of Dark Souls was written to emulate this experience that the creator had as a child. And you can feel that. You can feel like the personal like reason that the story was written the way it was. And even then, it still had a narrative that like had a beginning, middle, and end that you can follow and put together and understand. And it read like, here is a book, but oh, this page got torn out. And you can go from page 34 to page 36 and or 37, and you don't know what happened, but those pages were written. You just didn't get to read them. So you can try and figure out, oh, how do we go from the last sentence on this page to the first sentence on this page that's 3 pages later, and you try and figure it out, but there is an answer because those pages do fucking exist. They just got torn out. Whereas with Hollow Knight and games of that type where they're trying to rip off what Dark Souls did, it feels like they just didn't write it. Lots of speculation for everyone. It feels like it was written as being incomplete on purpose. Like, you didn't write a book and then went through and tore some pages out. You just wrote page 15, page 20, page 86, page 90. Figure it out. Lots of interpretation for everyone. And again, I don't want to pick on Hollow Knight about that, but they're both games that are bugs and have like really good like settings. So it's an easy target for comparison. I prefer not like, it's not really like a preference thing. It's like the reason Hollow Knight was written the way it was written, it was because they were trying to do the Dark Souls thing instead of having their own story to tell. Whereas Bug Fables has really interesting world building and like things like that aren't explained by the story, but you can figure them out if you pay attention and like put things together and take this one piece of dialogue and that from this like nondescript character in this out of the way location and realize, oh shit, that's explaining what, like, take the Wasp King, where you fight the Wasp King, you get his spy data, and it gives you his backstory, where it's like, this was some guy who was born in the Deadlands, and he was abandoned by his parents, and he had to, like, somehow he survived and made it to the Wasp Kingdom and integrated himself in the Wasp Kingdom, but that description doesn't mention whether or not he was a wasp. It just says he managed to, like, integrate himself and fit in the Wasp Kingdom, but he was treated like shit, and he like, had a hard life even there, so he left, and then one day he came back, and he had these magic powers, and it's like, what's up with that? And then you go to, like, Metal Island, and you talk to this guy, and he says, like, oh man, I fished this crown out of the ocean and gave it to this kid who was a fly, and then he went off north. And you're like, oh shit, that was the Wasp King. The Wasp King was a fly, and he got the crown from this dude and then went off north to the Wasp Kingdom to take it over. And then you learn from the roaches at the end of the game in the roach village, where they say, like, that motherfucker was wearing the crown, that was one of our artifacts, how the fuck did he get that? Maybe we shouldn't have thrown it away. And you're like, oh, the crown was the reason. It had some kind of, like, magic to it that let him cast fire magic and gave him, like, this charisma that allowed him to, like, stage a coup and take over the Wasp Kingdom and turn it into this like, military state. But he hated all those motherfuckers for treating him like shit. So he just used them as, like, as cannon fodder to try and fight his way to getting the everlasting sapling. And he wanted, because like he was like treated like shit. He was born and left to die from the get-go, so he felt like, I survived, so I'm entitled to this. I reject your reality and substitute my own. I deserve to win because I have survived so much. I have endured so much pain and suffering, and I have earned like my monarchy and my godhood, because like I was treated bad, so this is what I'm entitled to, and I will destroy everyone who treated me like shit in order to get to it. And it's like, that's not spelled out for you, but you can find things in the world and like get this information and get that spy data and get that character dialogue from these NPCs and put that together in your own head and realize that is this story of this main villain. And it's like, that is the kind of storytelling you can have with real actual world building, instead of like, oh, what the fuck's going on with the pale palace? What's the pale king and the palace of pain? What the fuck's it called? The pale palace? Something like that, right? How's that in the dream world? Ooh, what did that guy at the top of the City of Tears do? He had this weird telescope that he looked down on. What the fuck was up with that? I don't know. Why isn't there a spider boss fight? The first fucking thing that happens in this game in Bug Fables is a spider boss fight, and that feels like so on purpose. There is like a room somewhere in the game that has the nail that the Hollow Knight uses as like a little Easter egg, and I was like, that's really cute. And even then, there's stuff that like isn't explained, but there's enough there to let you like try and put it together. Like, it doesn't have a definitive answer, but it's like it does inspire you to think about it. There's a way. It's because you learn about like the giants. And you obviously think like, okay, so those were humans, because this is a game where you're playing as bugs. The ant palace is a giant orange. People make houses out of like shoe boxes and like milk cardboard, milk cartons and stuff like that. In the ocean, there's just a can of Coke that's floating. The desert is a sandbox, clearly, very obviously a sandbox. And at the end of the game, you get to the land of the giants, and there's like, it's clearly just like someone's kitchen. You're going up a refrigerator, and there's a stove top and all that interesting stuff. And you're like, okay, so obviously the giants are humans, right? And there's some things that aren't explained about like the land of the giants, where it's like, what the fuck's that giant eye? And like, what the actual fuck? It's never explained like, where the fuck did all the humans go? Because the giants were clearly humans, right? And at first I was like, oh, maybe this is like some kind of like thing where we're seeing the world from the perspective of the bugs, and it's not necessarily supposed to be taken literally. Like, years for bugs might just be like a day, because the lifespan of a bug is really short. But no. Like, I was overthinking it in that sense, because, like, there's literally a side quest that's, like, find these books and they'll give you lore information. And it's like, yeah. And you read all those and you're like, okay, no. So, like, something fucking happened. Something happened where, like, humans are just gone. And bugs, like, gained sapience and a longer lifespan. And, like, a more complex, like, set stages of maturity and stuff like that. And like, some bugs lost the ability to fly, like moths and stuff, and flies like can't fly anymore. Only bees and wasps can still fly. And like, some bugs didn't get elevated, some bugs didn't gain sapience, and not all the bugs got sapience at the same time. It was like a gradual thing. And so there's enough that is explained that like lets you know, like, okay, so it's not what I thought it was. It's not like you can go theoretically you could go like far enough in this world and like see a bunch of children playing in the sandbox and like using a magnifying glass to like cause a stage hazard or something like that, right? Because that's what I thought it was. I thought, like, theoretically, you could go to somewhere in this world and, like, a magnifying glass sending down death rays would be, like, a stage hazard. But no, that's not what it is. Humans are gone. And bugs have sapience and awareness, and, like, their lifespan has been changed and altered. It's all very legit. So enough is there so that you can't to like spell certain things out and like provide like world details, but enough is left unexplained to make you go like, okay, so what the fuck happened? What the fuck happened to the humans? And why do the bugs have sapience now? And here's my personal theory is some nukes happened. Humanity wiped itself out in a nuclear war or some shit. And that wiped out all of humanity, and the radiation caused bugs to mutate and gain sapience. That's why roaches are the most advanced bugs, because roaches are the motherfuckers who are gonna survive in the post-apocalypse. So the roaches were the most susceptible to, like, awakening and becoming this like new life form the fastest, and were able to like become the most technologically advanced and start doing all this crazy shit. That's my theory. Now, who knows? Who knows what a sequel will reveal? Maybe it shouldn't reveal anything. I think it's good to leave that as like background where it can be speculated on, but it doesn't matter enough to require a definitive answer or explanation. But it is good that there's enough details there to like you can speculate. And that's the thing. You want people to be able to speculate, not literally have to make shit up to try and fill in the holes in your story that you didn't feel like writing. I'm done. I'm done going on about that. This game was really fucking good. All the characters were great. I loved, like, V, Kabu, and Leaf are just the best characters. I liked like, Elizant's little development throughout the game, where she starts out as being kind of a bitch, but then she becomes not a bitch. That's kind of V's story too, where she starts out being a bitch, but then she becomes not quite so much a bitch. There's so many sweet moments where, like, at a later stage of the game, like, V says something, and Leaf and Kabu both kind of look at each other and go like, she's really changed. And I was like, yeah, we've been through a lot together. And it's like, that's the stuff. That's the stuff where you're like, these characters, in that interview, that the developers did, they said, like, I hope people will still be thinking about this game and thinking about these characters 15 years from now. I think absolutely. It's not something that I think about that often, but I can very easily see some kid playing this game on his Switch and playing through the story and, like, developing like a fondness and like childhood attachment for Kabu, V, and Leaf, and caring about those characters, and that like having like being something they carry with them in fondness and like investment in those characters being something that they carry with them as they become adults. And that's just really cool. It's really cool that like this game had that. And fucking sequel maybe would be a good idea. I don't know. Anyway, I'm waiting on I did order a new laptop, so this is the last time you're gonna be seeing this terrible ass webcam. Next time I'm capable of recording something with a webcam, it's gonna be with a much better webcam. So, the last the last swan song for this webcam and doing videos like this is talking about bug fables. So, yay. Game of the year. Bug Fables. Game of the year 2020. Clickbait. YouTube thumbnail.